Good evening and welcome to Facebook Live with Mark Serwotka, our General Secretary, and myself, Fran Heathcote. I'd also like to welcome once again our signer, Richard Law, who does a sterling job with all of that. And I'd like to thank you all for joining us this evening when we're going to be discussing everything to do with our pay campaign. Our campaign that we're launching tonight is for fair pay for government workers. And we want to give you the chance to raise any questions, comments or concerns that you've got by putting them in the comments box, and we'll try to get through as many of those as we can. I want to really start by saying a huge thank you to all of you for everything that you're doing, whether that's as a PCS rep doing a fantastic job supporting our members, or as a PCS member serving the public at the time when you're so much needed. So obviously the government are thanking us profusely for all of that, and we think it's time they started to recognise that in our pay packets, which is obviously why we're launching the campaign. So can I remind you to just like and share this event so that we can get to as many members as possible, and I'll say now, we expect to run for about an hour, so it won't be for a very long event, but we will try to get through, as I say, as much as possible. So I want to start off by asking Mark a number of sort of introductory questions really that set the scene. Mark, can I start by asking you to just update us on the pay talk so far with the Cabinet Office?
Okay, thanks very much, Fran. Good evening to you and to Richard, and thanks to everybody for joining us. People will remember that last year we ran a campaign for fair pay. We balloted for industrial action, and we had the biggest ever vote for strike action in the history of our union, but we fell agonisingly short of the undemocratic thresholds on pay. And from that moment onwards, we set ourselves the task of ensuring that if we couldn't persuade the government this year to treat us fairly, that we do the work needed to ensure that if we ever had to ballot again, we would hopefully be in a position to beat the threshold. But we also continue talking to the Cabinet Office. And from before Christmas this year, right into the early part of the new year, and certainly before the pandemic started, we had discussions with the Cabinet Office. And what we were seeking to do was to tell them that in this year, they needed to put right the decade of pay cuts that we had suffered. They needed to argue on our behalf with the Treasury to make money available for the civil service and for all of our members working on government, whether in the private sector or as public sector workers. And crucially, we sought to persuade them that they should scrap the system of having dozens of separate pay talks, department by department, and go back to a central system of pay that we would all get fair pay rises across the board. And as part of that process, ensure that we had the same rates of pay regardless of whom we worked for. Now, in those discussions, we were clearly trying to signal that we needed them to act differently this year. Then obviously we submitted our pay claim, and earlier in the year we submitted a 10% pay claim. And we argued for a national pay negotiations. Now, just after we did that, the pandemic struck. And in our discussions with the Cabinet Office, we never really got to a position where we were able to formally have detailed talks around that 10% pay. And at that point, given the severity of the situation we were in, we took a decision on the NEC that we would say to the Cabinet Office that we were prepared to wait until later in the year to get into full negotiations over our 10%, but we asked them on an interim basis to make a cross-the-board above inflation pay rise to every member. That didn't mean we needed to have countless sets of pay talks in different departments, and it would have eased the pressure on people's income. And after an 8-week delay, the government came around and told us no. Now, obviously, that was regrettable, because at this point, the government constantly told us that we were key workers and that we were doing a marvellous job, but they rejected our approach to make a central above inflation pay rise to everyone. And what they did at that time, Fran, was they issued what is called the Pay Remit. And the Pay Remit is a document from the Treasury that goes out to all departments and employers, and it restricts the amount of money that they have available for individual pay talks. And that pay remit sought to limit pay rises to between 1.5% and 2.5%. So at that stage, we indicated to the Cabinet Office that that was unacceptable, and we would now be launching a fully blown campaign to achieve our 10% demands. And we've now entered a phase where every department has gone into separate pay talks. Some of those, the employers have already imposed payments of 2.5% or less. Others, those talks are still going on. And all I want to do to bring people right round to conclude where we are now is that we have issued guidance to all our negotiators, making it clear we cannot reach agreements with any employer on what represents a pay cut. Even a 2.5% pay rise is less than other unions have already rejected in other parts of the public sector, and it's below what inflation was when we submitted our claim. And we've also said to big departments like HMRC, who have indicated they want us to take changes to terms and conditions that would mean some members are worse off to get extra money, that we're not prepared to trade in terms and conditions. So that's what's happened in the talks process up to now, and that's why the launch of this campaign is so important, because we now want to put pressure on the Treasury to recognise 1.5% to 2.5% is an insult, and we're determined now to campaign for a fair pay rise across the board for everybody, and we believe that should be 10%.
Okay, thanks very much, Mark. So what has the NEC decided then? We've met and obviously taken some key decisions, and it'd be useful just to update on some of that.
So what we decided is obviously that the government's response is unacceptable because it means pay cuts for everyone. So we have decided now to increase and launch a national pay campaign. And we did that not just because of the government's unfair treatment, but because we surveyed all of our members, and 88% of members told us in that survey that they wanted the union to campaign harder for fair pay. So when the NEC met, we were very conscious that if this was normal times, probably now what we would be consulting over is whether to launch a ballot for industrial action in order to try to force the government around the negotiating table. But the NEC was very conscious at a time of the pandemic, when most members are at home and not in work, when many of our reps are also at home, that it would be very, very difficult to achieve the required 50% turnout in a ballot and to have industrial action at this time. So the NEC decided that what we should do is now have a campaign starting with the launch of a petition, and a petition that we are aiming to get 100,000 signatures, which will force the government to have a parliamentary debate on our pay claim. And that petition is meant not just to force the government politically to have to publicly debate our pay claim, but most importantly, it's a petition that is designed to get people involved in the campaign. And we want people not just to sign this petition, but to ask their work colleagues to sign, their friends, their families, people in the community. And we're asking people to get involved in a campaign. And if we get the 100,000 signatures, that won't just force the government to have a debate in Parliament. More importantly, it will tell us that if we've got that many members and people signing our petition, we'll be very well placed should we need to consider a ballot for industrial action later in the year. This would be excellent preparation. So the first stage of the campaign is the petition, and we'll be doing lots of case studies, lots of media, lots of political interventions, all getting this campaign running over the summer months with a view to the autumn, if the government hasn't treated us more fairly than it currently intends to, being in a position to consider all options, including industrial action.
Okay, thanks, Mark. I think that's clear and you know, gives us a bit of background of what's gone on so far. I've got a number of shout outs and branches. I'll just read those out, and if people want to say hello or give solidarity greetings to people on the call, just send those in, and as I say, I'll get to as many as I can. So the solidarity and support from the PCS Arms Committee, from Revenue and Customs London North, good evening from DWP West Wales branch, hi from DVLA Swansea, and hi from Bootle Taxes. Also, Revenue and Customs supports down Vectis branch, and fraternal greetings from Glasgow Social Security Scotland, and that's Alan who sent those greetings. In terms of the petition, I probably just ought to update people that that's gone in my name. It had to have a 7-day lead-in time, so it was submitted a week ago, and we're now waiting for the government to come back and just say that it's ready to go live so that we can launch that. And as Mark said, the purpose of it is to warm people up for the campaign and get as many signatures as we can for people to say that we deserve fair pay with everything that's going on. There's obviously a number of questions coming in. As I say, I'll take as many as I can, and I'll start with one, Mark, from Jenny Brown from the MOJ Midwest branch, who said, I've worked within the civil service for over 17 years, and every year it's the same struggle to get a decent pay rise. Why is it so difficult? And why is it there are so many different pay ranges across different departments within the civil service? With regard to pensions, why does it take so long to resolve disputes and for the government to give us back our overpayment? And Jenny just wants to end by thanking us for everything that we're doing and thanking union reps for everything they're doing. So that's a great message. And Mark, I don't know if you can shed some light on that.
Well, thanks very much, Jenny, for your question, and it's great to hear you thanking your reps, because obviously our union is only ever able to campaign because of the fantastic work that all of our reps do. And anyone watching this tonight who's not a rep or an advocate for the union who wants to get involved and do more, give us your details, because we can never have enough people right across the union helping us build these campaigns. So Jenny's question really sums up just how unfairly we are treated. So let's deal with the question of different pay rates across different government departments. So when I joined the civil service, and that was in 1980, in the Department for Health and Social Security, now the DWP, we had central pay rates for all government departments, and we had central pay negotiations, and by and large, wherever you worked, we had the same rates of pay for the same graded jobs. Mrs. Thatcher, when she was attacking public services and trade unions back in the 1980s, recognised that what we needed to do was to break up the civil service into different component parts. And what we had then was a process that ended national pay bargaining, and every department had to negotiate its own pay. Now, that was done to weaken the union, but it was also done to cut the real terms pay that people actually got. And what it has meant is that we now have a situation where people doing the same graded work in different departments get vastly different rates of pay. It was done to weaken us. It was done to keep pay rates low. And it is something that we need to overturn. And therefore, our pay climb this year is not just for 10%, but it is to return to national pay bargaining, to equalise pay rates across the civil service to the best rates that we currently have, and to end the scourge of departments playing one off against the other. And that is part of this campaign, Jenny. And I should say that one of the ways that we're going to try and bring extra pressure is not just through our petition and potentially balloting later in the year. It is to take legal action. And one of the things the union is actively doing at the moment is looking for a series of equal pay cases that we can bring to compare workers who are worse paid in one department against another, to try to force legally the case for national pay bargaining. And I would say on that one that since Brexit, it's been clear that when they did Operation Yellowhammer, they did have civil servants from different departments doing exactly the same work, but paying them different rates of pay. So legal action is another part of this campaign. Why do they treat us this way? Well, the government always treats the public sector in this way in order to save money. And when it does that to the public sector, it usually treats the civil service worse than anybody else, to lead by example. And therefore, what we know is that if we leave it to the government to treat us fairly, we will be waiting forever. And that's why this campaign is so important, because if the government in this year of all years, when we've kept the justice system running, done 2.6 million claims to universal credit, kept the transport system running, kept the prisons going, when we've got the job retention scheme going. If Boris Johnson tells us we're key workers but still gives us a pay cut, it just tells us how the government thinks it can get away with it. And only our campaign is going to be able, I think, to force them to treat us fairly. And the final point to your question, Jenny, on pensions, and I'm glad you've raised that, is because that is also part of what we're campaigning for here. Because apart from asking for a decent pay rise, we are also demanding they give us back our pensions overpayment. which is 2% a month minimum, backdated to April 2019. It would make a huge difference. And I'm pleased to confirm tonight that those who don't already know that our joint legal action against the government involving 20 unions, of which PCS is one of the key 4 unions, has now been submitted to the High Court, and we are waiting for a court date to try and legally force the government also to give us our pensions money back.
Okay, thanks very much, Mark. We've had solidarity greetings sent from the National Black Members Committee, so hello to all of you. And a question now from Brian Roberts. Whilst I agree that we deserve a decent pay rise given the freeze over the last 10 years, I just can't see the Treasury caving in. They don't even appear to be especially supportive of a significant rise for NHS staff, for which there would probably be a lot of public support. What can our union do if we don't get a pay rise?
So I think it's a great question, and let's be clear, unless we're able to force them, then the Treasury will treat us appallingly. We know that. They've already told us they're accepting us 2.5% or less, and many people will get a lot less than 2.5% if the Treasury get their way. We also know, if you listen to the leaks that have been put into the media over the last couple of months, the Treasury are probably planning a further assault on the public sector in terms of pay, possible pay freezes being mooted, further attacks on public spending. So what we have to do is to show them that as key workers, we're not letting them get away with it. And that means ultimately that a combination of members getting behind the union, starting with a petition, trying to take legal action, but ultimately being prepared, if we have to take industrial action, not just with PCS, although that's all we can do at this point, but talking to other unions to see if we can persuade them also to join us in a campaign, certainly could force the Treasury to treat us differently. And I say that because, you know, we're leaving the European Union. Well, we've left the European Union, but there's negotiations going on now about the terms. Everyone knows the civil service is more key than ever before. And therefore, were we to potentially withdraw our labour and put pressure on them, the government knows it will struggle. And that's why this campaign is so important. And that's why I also want to say that although tonight this is a PCS event, the NEC will be meeting next week. And one of the things we'll be discussing will be our motions to go to the TUC conference in September. And I can say tonight that one of the motions that will be put to the NEC next week to consider putting to the TUC will be a motion calling for a public sector-wide TUC-backed joint union campaign for fair pay. And if the NEC agrees to put that motion, then what that's telling us, hopefully, I hope in answering the question, is that whilst we've got to do what we can, we hopefully will call on other unions to join us in the autumn, particularly if they announce a pay freeze, to ensure that as many public sector workers as possible can unite to get fair pay for civil servants, but also for health workers, teachers and local government workers.
Okay, thanks very much, Mark. We've got a number of questions in from the DWP, and there's one here that I think probably I'm best placed to answer. Tracy Moore from DWP Greater Manchester branch asks, what's the situation with those of us in the DWP who opted out of the employee deal? Are we going to somehow be brought in line with the pay our colleagues who opted in are receiving, which is pertinent because the changes that they took the pay rise for have never been implemented? And of course, that is a question that a number of DWP members who opted out are asking. We concluded the DWP pay negotiations. They ended today. DWP are wedded to paying on time, and obviously our award it runs from the 1st of July. And what they made very clear is they weren't prepared to discuss that issue as part of this year's pay talks. And it links back to what Mark was outlining in terms of the pay remit. Because the remit is so restrictive, it doesn't give them the ability to do anything to address that category of worker. Now, obviously, we would argue that what they should therefore do is make a business case for additional money in order to address that issue. And Lee McCartney has asked, what can be done for DWP members when the employer can stonewall PCS by refusing to make a business case for increased pay? What DWP have said is that they will continue to negotiate with us over the issues outlined in respect about those who opted out. So although pay negotiations have ended and ended today, they will continue to negotiate with the PCS pay team around the members that opted out and around what can be done to attempt to bring their pay in line with their colleagues for the future. Now, we recognise that that's far from ideal, and people had high expectations for this year's pay round, but with the remit that they've been given, which outlines why it's so important that DWP members can support the national campaign, it's impossible for them to address the issues of the opted out members. So we, you know, it's not great news, but what we have got is a commitment in the next fortnight to the start of talks to address those issues around those that have opted out. So I hope that goes some way to explaining at least what their rationale is, even if none of us agree with it. Okay, the next question then comes from Tony Watson, who says, what is the Labour Party's stance on civil service pay? Are they supportive? Do we have their full support? And why are they not already mentioning this in Parliament on our behalf? And obviously, Mark, we know that there's quite a lot of work that we do with our parliamentary group, so wonder whether you could perhaps just update on that.
Yes, so certainly our parliamentary group, which is a cross-parliamentary group, although the majority of MPs in it are Labour MPs, but the chair is Chris Stevens from the Scottish National Party. They have already been lobbying hard on our behalf over pay. They have asked questions in Parliament. Chris Stevens himself has put the question of civil service pay to Boris Johnson at Prime Minister's questions, and they have circulated early day motions, and the parliamentary group are certainly supporting us. Now, the Labour Party, clearly we will be speaking to the Labour Shadow Cabinet, and when our petition goes live, one of the things that we're looking to do with our MPs is we're asking our MPs not just to sign our petition, but to make it clear that they're supporting us and urging others to sign our petition as well. And therefore, political campaigning with the Labour Party particularly, but through our parliamentary group, is a really important part of this campaign. And what we'll do as this rolls out is we were going to be asking members to be contacting their local MP with the petition, and we will be further getting this raised in Parliament. And if we can, we'll be asking the Labour Party to make a very clear and unequivocal statement that they back our campaign and they believe civil servants deserve the pay rise that we're asking for.
Okay, thanks, Mark. That's helpful. Okay, there's a question next from Freddie from Birmingham, which is a really important question. Does the campaign cover people working in contracted out areas? Many have been working throughout the lockdown and have very low pay. So, Mark, I know you'll be glad to update on that.
I will, and hopefully when we submitted the petition, we did not just talk about civil servants, we talk about government workers. And what the union means by government workers is all of our members who are working in the public sector and for government, whether in the civil service, in the public sector and public bodies, or indeed in the private sector. And we recognise that our members in the private sector are some of the lowest paid on some of the worst conditions. And our campaign is to get fair pay for everyone, and we certainly are urging all of our members working in private contractors to get behind this campaign itself, to urge colleagues to join the union, and whilst we will be pursuing fair pay through this petition, and whilst potentially we may well be moving to an industrial action ballot later in the year, in private companies and in public bodies, the union will be supporting any groups of members who wish to be campaigning against their employer up to and including specific campaigns. So we all deserve fair pay. And for our private sector members, they also deserve the same terms and conditions as all our civil service members get. And I've just put a plug in now, starting, for example, with the right to sick pay, whereas we know with our sort of Dying for Sick Pay campaign that we've launched, many members and private contractors will be going back onto statutory sick pay, £19.71 a day. And therefore, we don't just want fair pay for them, we also want proper terms and conditions. Ultimately, Fran, I'll just finish by saying, therefore, that whilst our private sector members deal with different issues in the union's overarching belief is that all of those members should be brought back into the public sector And our cleaners, our security guards, our IT workers, we believe ultimately they also should be brought back into the civil service to enjoy the same terms and conditions as everyone else.
Okay, thanks so much, Mark. That's great, thank you. There's a question here from Fina Wright. Do you think the public opinion of us has improved after all the work we did during the pandemic, getting furlough and SEIS, money, so to speak? So that's a question from Fina.
So I think I caught most of that. So I think there's a big job of work for us to do as a union, and that this will certainly be part of the campaign that we're running. Yes, I think that those people who have relied on the civil service, I have no doubt that our standing is high. People who have had a universal credit claim dealt with, people who are furloughed and are taking advantage of the job promotion, people who have seen our members working on the front line, I think will have had first-hand experience of what we've known for years, which is we do critical work that keeps the country running. But there's a lot more to be done. And one of the things that we'll be doing in this campaign is a series of case studies that will get across what our members do and how we affect people in all walks of life and how lowly paid we are. And I think that will help, get across the message to those who still don't quite realise the civil servants are not mandarins who sit in Whitehall departments in the way they're portrayed in the Daily Mail. We are actually central to delivering every aspect of support that people rely on from cradle to grave. And that will be a very key part of our campaign moving forward.
Okay, thank you very much, Mark. And apologies from me that I'm having some problems with my camera, but I'll just read out a few messages of solidarity and support. Hello from East Kilbride HMRC. Greetings from Revenue and Customs West Mercia. Hello from DWP Leeds. Hi from Northern Region Arms. Solidarity from the Forestry Commission National Branch. Greetings from Home Office HQ Branch. Solidarity and stay safe, everyone. Solidarity from Dundee Pension Centre, from Durham HMPO. Greetings from Scotland DWP Region, and solidarity from all at Dundee Pension Centre. So there's a big chunk of messages there that hopefully I've caught up with. Okay, the next question then is from Jasmine Loter, who is the branch secretary of the PCS British Museum United branch, who asks, what will PCS do to support our group campaign for emergency funding across the culture sector? Many of our security staff have been working throughout the COVID-19 crisis, providing essential services to our employer, and don't want to settle for the insulting pay rise that we will most likely end up with for yet another year. So, Mark, I don't know if you can just shed some light there about in terms of the culture group.
Well, I'm really pleased that this has come up, and let me start by paying tribute. And for anyone who is not aware, so our members and our reps in the culture group really have faced an onslaught. That we have members who are facing redundancies, people being threatened with pay cuts, cuts to their pensions, because obviously the funding position in many of our institutions is very, very worrying. And therefore, we've had some great campaigning taking place throughout our culture group, and I know they've had some really great events with lots of members and reps taking part. So as a union, I think all of us need to show our solidarity with our members in culture. And the union's national executive is very clear that we will be supporting not just the group, but branches within the group who need to take whatever action is required to defend their members' jobs, livelihoods, pay and conditions. And that means that we will be supporting in all ways that we can to help get political campaigning off the ground, with raising it with politicians in Parliament, with ministers, but also supporting our reps and members on the ground with bespoke campaigns, whichever part of the culture sector that they take place in. And certainly I can tell you that the union has already raised with the Cabinet Office, and we are seeking a meeting with the Cabinet Office about the parlous situation that the culture sector is in, and seeking reassurances around funding. And whilst I don't believe the Cabinet Office will wave a magic wand, hopefully that's an indicator that the NEC is fully behind our members there, and anything that we're asked to support, I'm sure the NEC will give 100% support to local campaigns as well as a group campaign and any political campaigning that's needed.
Okay, thanks very much, Mark. I'm grappling with my camera, so apologies if my camera's moving around a bit. Okay, a question from Suzanne Wyman then. Unpaid strikes get nowhere because you lose more money doing that. People don't vote for them because you lose every time. About time there was a paid strike. You will say we don't have the funds, but I don't see how. There's been no paid strike in years, and definitely not since I joined in December 1998. There's a question for you, Mark. And why aren't we just paying everybody to take strike action?
So I'm glad this question has come up, because obviously when we balloted for industrial action last year, the union was not advocating in that ballot that we just had a series of one-day strikes that were unpaid and they were protests. Actually, what we balloted members on is that we asked all members to vote for industrial action. That industrial action should then be a combination of national action, but also targeted action. And the targeted action that the union was proposing to take would have attracted strike pay. And to that end, we changed the subscriptions that we asked members to give, to ask people to give a 50p a month levy to go into our strike fund. And the union put £1 million from the compensation we got off the DWP for illegally attacking the union's subscriptions check-off arrangements into a strike fund. And that strike fund is continuing to grow. So whilst we don't have the tens of millions that big unions like Unite and Unison have, we do have a strike fund. And moving forward, if members are balloted again on industrial action, targeted action, I'm sure, will be a central part of that strategy. But to do that, we will still need over 50% of our members to participate in a ballot. And that is what we proposed last time. And I just really wanted to just think and ask people to think about that for a moment, Fran, that last year, I said we had the biggest strike vote in the union's history, much bigger than any strike vote we had throughout the 80s, 90s or 2000s, where we'd regularly had majority votes for industrial action. And we had 48.8% of members turning out and 80% of people were voting for strikes. So what that tells us is that those members who voted were prepared to take industrial action, and that action, we believe, could have been effective. So in order to put pressure on the Treasury, and this is why we're starting with a petition, we all know now, whether that is targeted action, paid or unpaid, we have to have more than half of our members voting. And if we get 100,000 signatures on a petition, and if we can get 100,000 PCS members signing a petition, then that will be a really good run-up and practice, if you like, for the ballot itself, because it shows we can get more than half our members participating. So paid action will definitely be part of the strategy that we will consider moving forward, but ultimately we will still need more than half of the members to vote. And I just want to reassure anyone watching that, when the NEC is clear that if we do get a ballot, the purpose of that is to win and not to protest. And the action that we will propose taking will be designed to have the maximum effect on government to get them around the negotiating table. And we have shown in this pandemic that we have thousands of members whose key work is needed more than ever. And that is precisely the type of threat the government will need to feel if they're going to give us what we deserve.
Okay, thank you. I've got a request here to just explain what's happening in respect to the devolved areas, because obviously their pay arrangements are often different, and it might be just useful to explain whether or not they're part of the campaign.
Yes, thanks very much, Fran. So obviously the members working in the devolved administrations whose pay is determined by the devolved administrations, their situation is different. The Scottish government certainly did what we asked the Westminster government to do earlier on in the pandemic, and they did make an across-the-board pay increase for our members in Scotland. Not enough money, but certainly better than what our Westminster counterparts did. So we are asking members in Scotland, in Wales and Northern Ireland to sign the petition and to urge their friends and families to sign the petition. We want all PCS members and their friends to sign this petition itself. But obviously the question of pay in the devolved sectors is determined by our members and reps in those sectors in terms of their negotiations with their respective governments. So yes, join the campaign and sign the petition, but the specifics of pay determined by Scottish and Welsh and Northern Ireland governments is slightly different, and we will give updates in those areas. And if people want any specific information, if you leave your details, we'll make sure that our reps in the devolved nations can answer any questions that you have.
Okay, thanks very much. I've got a couple of questions here from Rupal Rabat from DWP Leicester, who asks, what do you think the chances are of the government and the Cabinet Office accepting the 10% increase when we haven't had a pay rise in decades and they haven't listened to us before? If the union does get 100,000 signatures on the petition, realistically, do we believe this will go in our favour? And if not, does the union have a plan in terms of the next course of action to tackle this further? Or will the 1.5 to 2.5% just be accepted? It's what she says. It's very frustrating and disheartening when we as key workers who, like myself, are risking our lives every day and have done for the past 3 months by going into work, we're not recognised and appreciated for the work that we do.
So I think we can all agree that that is absolutely correct. That, you know, it's been more frustrating, I think, than ever before for our members to actually see Boris Johnson, to see Rishi Sunak on TV talking about the fantastic work that we're doing, but then giving us or proposing to give us another pay cut. And therefore, I think the straight answer to the question is, what chance is there that they will give us the 10%? Well, without our campaign, there's no chance. If we're not able to put pressure on them, then we know that they will expect us to just take between 1.5% and 2.5%. And therefore, what chance we have depends on how effective now the union can campaign. And the first thing, therefore, is to recognise that the 10% claim that we've put in is only half of what we have lost in real terms over the last decade. Now, a lot of people start by saying 10%, that's a lot. But if you've actually lost 20% in 10 years, it's only half of what you've lost. And clearly, if you don't put in a claim that reflects what you believe you deserve, you've got no chance of getting anywhere near it. That's why we put the claim in for 10% and asked for national pay. So what chance we have will now depend what we can do as a union. And our strategy is this. Petition is a start. But the key thing about the petition is, I want to be honest, no one believes if we get 100,000 signatures on the petition, the government will say there's 10%. But the 100,000 signatures to get to that level of support means we have to do a lot of work to get members to sign. And that work is all designed to get people involved and active in our campaigns, to go to meetings, virtual meetings, online meetings, get involved, ask colleagues to join the union, ask colleagues to sign the petition, so that we are building support on the ground. Whilst that's happening, we'll be doing our case studies, we will be making political representations and doing political campaigning and looking at our legal options. And what this is designed to do is to build the momentum of the campaign over the summer and into the autumn. And at the time we get the 100,000 signatures, there will have to be a debate in Parliament. And we would want to maximise as much as we can activity around that date. But if it's clear as we approach that the government is refusing to budge, will not reopen talks, then obviously at that stage, all the work we have done should mean that if the legal threat, the political threat, the 100,000 signatures are still failed to budge them, then we should be in a much stronger position to feel we can ballot and win a ballot to put the maximum pressure on them later in the year. And that's the strategy that we have, recognising it's going to have to take and build this campaign over the months ahead to put us in the strongest possible position in the autumn. And the last thing I'd say is, if the NEC agrees next week that our motion to the TUC conference in September is about pay, then exactly at the same time, we would also hope that the TUC will also agree that all public sector unions should also be agreeing to campaign at the same time on pay. So that's our strategy, to build over the coming months and to put as much pressure legally, politically, to build momentum. And if all of that doesn't help or persuade them, then potentially a ballot for industrial action later in the year.
Okay, yeah, and really more a comment than anything, but Kelly Kane says, the government rely on us in a crisis to change job roles, get 4 days training, work 6 days a week, voluntarily give up our leave, helping the most vulnerable in society, which every single civil servant redeployed did without a thought. We played a major key part in this crisis to ensure that benefits are paid on time, applications on universal credit were processed, phone calls were covered, and yet after 10 years of pay freezes, we're struggling ourselves. Our families are now vulnerable with the cost of living rising and doing so over the last 10 years. Yet we get a shameful offer of between 1.5 and 2.5% pay increase. It's heartbreaking and it's shameful. And I think that really just adds to an awful lot of what's been said. I mean, people really are, you know, pulling out all the stops to deliver the services, and we're not being thanked in return other than with warm words. So a few more solidarity greetings just to read out. Solidarity from Durham HMPO, greetings from Scotland DWP region, solidarity from all at Dundee Pension Centre, hi from the HMPO, hi from Rachel Farmer, Branch Secretary at Revenue and Customs, Benton Park View, Clive Handley from the DWP, shout out from Coventry and Warwickshire Branch, hi from Peter Lee HMRC, and solidarity from the Northern Region LGBT+ Forum. And this next question, you know, we obviously, there's a range of views on all of this, and I think I should read this out. This is from Abigail Bowers, who says, I don't think we should be fighting for more money. We have secure jobs. The government are dealing with something unprecedented, borrowing billions that can't pay back. We should leave the fight until next year. And I don't know if you want to answer that, Mark, but it's, you know, I think a lot of people feel that they just can't wait another year with unfair pay. But over to you.
Yes, and I'm glad that question has come in, because you know, that is clearly the view of the questioner. So my starting point here is that's not the view of members when we've done the survey. And I just want to go back to the fact that 88% of members in the survey actually said fighting this year for fair pay was their top priority. And it was really interesting that 85% in the same survey said keeping them safe during the pandemic was also one of their priorities. So this ranked even higher. And I think what that reflects is that members have just had enough. And I think what people are saying to us is that we've had this year after year after year. And in this year, where members have gone that extra mile, as one of the earlier statements you read out said, Fran, many people have felt they put their health and safety and lives on the line, delivered like never before. You know, I did a reps call in Dundee last week, you know, and a member was on talking about how stressful it was working from home, dealing with bereavement cases in the DWP. And what I got from all of our members last week is they care about the service they provide. But, you know, people are fed up of just being treated in such an appalling way. And that's why I think we can't put it off. And I think we also can't put it off because it's also the case that it isn't even for most of our members that everybody feels their jobs are secure. You know, yesterday I was on a call with the chief executive of HMRC, along with Lorna Mary and Hector Wesley and Martin Kelsey and some of our reps in HMRC, Marianne Owens. And that there we were having to deal with the fact that they've just launched a redundancy scheme in HMRC covering over 2,000 people. And so not everyone's job is safe. Some people face threats to their terms and conditions. We already know that we're paying 2% more for our pension every month than we should. And I think, you know, the view that the NEC takes, backed by members in that survey strongly, is if not now, when. And I think that is the feeling, that if we let them get away with it in this year's of all years, then members, many of whom really will think that, you know, there hasn't been a better time given the key work that we're actually doing. And to address something that someone said earlier on, perhaps a greater recognition from many people that the work we are doing is key work. Last thing to say, and again, you know, whilst I respect the view certainly of everybody who asked a question, in HMRC alone, I think it's 12,000 members on or around the national minimum wage. So, you know, what we've also got to recognise here is that we have people on poverty pay who are struggling to make ends meet. And I think they're telling us loud and clear, the union must fight now to get them the pay that they deserve.
Okay, thank you very much, Mark. Kate McFarland from DWP Swansea says, can you find out what percentage MPs' pay will be increased by this year? They put all civil servants on a 1% pay cap for the last 10 years, but gave themselves a 12% increase. They've capped our pay again because they can't afford to give us any more. So I want to know if they will be taking the same real term pay cut that they have given us. And I think that's a sentiment that is shared by many of us. I'm going to read the next comment out. It's not about pay, but it is something that's very topical in the DWP, certainly. And it's a question from Lily Hughes. She says, I'm more concerned about the job centres reopening. I'm lucky I'm working from home, but I have friends in the job centre who will be put at risk. And I feel asking for 10% pay rise will turn the public against us. So obviously a little bit like Abigail, not necessarily her biggest concern right now isn't the pay rise, it's the reopening of the job centres. And obviously there's a number of us campaigning in terms of both issues. I don't know if Mark, if there's anything you want to say about the job centres reopening. It clearly is a big concern. I know the DWP group have been working very hard on that.
Yes, and I'm glad that question's come in. We have huge concerns about the reopening of the job centres. I know that Martin Kavanagh, the DWP Group President, Fran and the team have been meeting management today, and the National Union is doing all we can to support the group. We are currently looking at a whole range of potential options, including going to the Health and Safety Executive, looking at our legal options, because we think that this is a political decision taken by government to force people back into unsafe conditions. And obviously, many members have been working right throughout in job centres, but the reopening causes us real concerns. So that is something the union is campaigning hard on. And if people are in DWP, you need to look out for all the communications that will be coming. But rest assured, with DWP management and with the Cabinet Office, we're doing everything we can to ensure that people are safe. And anyone who has concerns, and anyone certainly who gets anyone ringing them up, suddenly telling them to go from home back into work, or if you're in work doing something that you think means you're not safe, go to your local union rep or contact the DWP Group office or our coronavirus helpline, where we will give you individual advice and tell you what we're doing. But I don't think the two things are exclusive. I think you can fight to be safe while still asking that people should be paid what they are deserved. And I know that the government probably will cynically try to turn some people against us because we're asking for a pay rise. But, you know, all I can say really to that is that the members of our union are clear in the survey that we've done that people have had enough. And I think when you tell a member of the public, you know, whenever I tell an MP or anyone that how many people are on the minimum wage or how many people are struggling just above the national minimum wage, how low our pay is, a lot of people are genuinely shocked. And so what we have to do is to try to unite people and say that delivering a service is our top priority, but we have a right to fair and decent pay and pensions. And the government are exploiting us. And it is only by campaigning for justice are we ever really going to get what we deserve. But again, I just want to reassure people who have this concern that part of the union's campaign will be through case studies and through getting our message out there of getting across exactly how important the work is that we do and exactly how poorly we are paid for doing it.
Okay, thank you. There's a number of questions come in from members in HMCTS. Sarah Hunt asks, why does HMCTS have a minimum and maximum wage scale at each band? I'm told that as band F basic salary has risen over the last few years, and no one in that pay range will go beyond the minimum salary. And that's linked really to a question from Helen Tate from MOJ Cleveland, Durham, Northumbria, who says, can I ask what has been done to address the inequality between departments' pay? As an HMCTS employee, the admin staff are one of the lowest paid in the civil service, which is particularly galling, bearing in mind that the majority of staff who aren't shielding have been coming into offices as usual during lockdown due to the fact that our IT is so poor and the lack of laptops have made home working impossible. So very low rates of pay coming in throughout the pandemic, and really a question there about progression as well, no ability to move from the minimum to the maximum of the grade. All issues I think that we've long been dealing with in terms of delegated pay bargaining and some of the problems with it. Mark, is there anything you want to add to that?
Well, two things I think to say is that clearly what's happened with pay progression across the civil service is a disgrace. And what we know is that under the current pay system, the Treasury is giving departments such a tiny sum of money that trying to fix these problems becomes nigh on impossible. And actually what that tells us is to get decent and fair pay, to eradicate long pay scales that people never actually progress up, this really for us needs to be solved by having national pay across the whole of the civil service, that everybody is paid the same regardless of what department that they're in, and that people get the rate for the job as quickly as possible. And the key to that, therefore, has to be accepting that whilst we have this delegated system, that people are divided up, and actually it is very difficult to make the breakthrough department by department. And that is why part of our strategy, to repeat, is looking at legal action by bringing equal pay cases based on the argument that you deserve equal pay for work of equal value, and bringing cases that demonstrate that the lower paid departments are potentially therefore acting unlawfully against the higher departments is a key component for us to try and get back to national pay. And I just want to stress that, because in these delegated talks that are taking place at the moment, we already know by and large what the outcome is going to be. No one is going to get more than the pay remit. A lot of people will get a lot less than the 2.5%. The underlying problems won't be fixed because departments don't have the money, and they will depend on us being divided to get away with that for another year. So the 10% is a key thing. We want everyone to have a proper pay rise, but the national pay is the fundamental thing that would have the longest lasting effect on everyone. Because if we did have national pay back, and if you remember in the last election, the Labour Party in that election promised to go back to national pay. The Conservatives will not do that. So if a combination of this campaign plus potential legal threats on the government or legal action, if we get back to a system of national pay, it would eradicate different rates in different parts of the country and allow us to also deal with the problems of pay progression that the questioner has referred to.
Okay, thank you. And I mean, that's very much echoed actually by Andrew Fletcher, who's written in to say 10% is not too much, but I would prefer the union to insist on pay parity for all departments. The permanent secretaries get paid the same regardless of department, so why not the rest of us? I know my pay is way below my equivalent pay grade in most departments, and obviously the answer to all of that is the national pay campaign and a return to national pay bargaining, which is why this campaign is so important, because it's those very issues that Andrew Fletcher outlines that are the crux of the problem. Michelle Holliday from the HMRC says, we definitely need to fight this. My wage as an AO in debt management is about 10 pence more than the minimum wage. It's disgraceful how we just get forgotten about with no thanks for the work we've just achieved throughout this pandemic. We all deserve so much better. We need to fight this now. And I think that's something we'd agree with, Mark. I mean, so many people, particularly in the HMRC, I think, are pennies above the minimum wage, and that's something that's been highlighted a lot. I don't know if there's anything you want to say about that.
Yeah, I mean, I do think it is extraordinary, the low levels of pay in the civil service, and HMRC has a particular problem. And I think we've talked about how national pay is the key to this, but HMRC, we know, is the one department where we are expecting, and we wait to see what happens, but we've been expecting for a while that the department may well seek to exploit the low pay that exists by trying to get people to give up terms and conditions in order to get a bit of extra money. And I think what we also have to say tonight is that that would be utterly unacceptable. You know, people deserve a pay rise without any strings attached. Giving up things that many people have had and fought for over many, many years, you know, is not the way forward. You can only sell things once, and doing that to generate more money really is a way of the department just trying to exploit low rates of pay. The answer is no strings attached, giving everybody the pay rise that they deserve. So I think, Fran, it is important to say that, and I think this is something I really did want to stress tonight, that because delegated talks are going on in lots of places, the union will not agree these pay positions with employers, and some employers may well impose pay rises, and they will range between 1.5% and 2.5%. What I wanted to stress is whatever happens in your employer, wherever is imposed, if that's what they do, that is not the end of this pay campaign, far from it. Our pay campaign is national, trying to get the Treasury to engage to give equal pay and fair pay across the whole of the civil service. So whatever happens in your department in the next few weeks, whatever the management try and get away with, that is not the end of the campaign, far from it. And to be honest, if they impose 2 or 2.5%, then, you know, the union's position is, well, it's better for that to be in your bank account than theirs, but that isn't the end of our claim. Our campaign continues, and whatever they impose, we are going to campaign for our full claim during the rest of the year.
Okay, thank you. We had a question earlier from Lee McCartney about why the DWP chose not to do a business case, and it sort of links to this question from Elaine White. Elaine White from DWP North Staffordshire says, I opted out of the employee deal and I'm on the maximum AO pay. How and why has it been made possible for an opted out AA to be paid, an opted in AA to be paid more than an AO when an AA is a lower grade? What are the union going to do about this, and is it even legal? Well, that's a good question, and it is something that we are currently taking legal advice about. In terms of the actual differential contained in this year's DWP pay offer is a £200 non-consolidated amount to create a gap, if you like, between the AA and the AO grade, because as you rightly say, for those who've opted out in the AO grade, they are being leapfrogged by those who've opted in at the AA grade. And so there is a non-consolidated payment which attempts to break that gap. But the real issue here is that the DWP have failed to do a business case. Now, clearly, the Treasury remit that Mark's already talked about says they can't pay more than 2.5%. The only way to address some of the anomalies that they have created in our department is by putting in a business case for additional money and permission to go above the 2.5%, and they have failed to do that because they feel that this year is not the right year. But unfortunately, that's been their answer for a number of years now, and it's just not good enough. So I think, Elaine, a number of us agree with you fully, and whilst the non-consolidated amount will create a gap between the AA and the AO grade again, it's clearly not a situation that any of us are happy about. And so the talks around those who've opted out and what we're going to do to move their pay in line with the rest of the department are really key to all of that. And again, a really important reason why people need to be part of the national campaign that would address all of this. A couple of shout outs from HMRC Stockton-on-Tees branch and also from SAS Shields Job Centres. So thanks so much for that. And then the last question that we've got time for comes from Danny Herbert from DEFRA in London and the South East. And I think, Mark, it's a really key one, actually. And that is, whilst it's not about pay directly, what can we expect from the hard rain which Dominic Cummings has promised will fall on civil servants, and what are we going to do to protect our members from it? So, Mark.
Well, thanks, Danny, and clearly, excuse me, what we can expect. Well, I think what we can expect is that the public spending round that the government announces later in the year is inevitably going to focus on the public sector to recoup some of the money that the government has spent on dealing with the pandemic. And Boris Johnson keeps saying that there will not be austerity, but I think we should fear the worst. And what might that look like? Well, we're campaigning for fair pay, but we've already talked about the fact that there's been all sorts of speculation the government may seek to freeze the pay of all public sector workers. I think we can expect in the civil service them to come back again and look at our redundancy terms. We know that there are office closures still progressing, and there's going to be a concern about people's jobs. The question of pensions remains unresolved, because as we're dealing with the better pensions that we should get as a result of the court victories, we know that the government may well try to come back on the question of public pensions. And on top of all of that, we're fearing mass unemployment, that the economy is likely to suffer. And therefore, I think we are right to expect that Dominic Cummings sees the public sector as something that is going to have to pay a large price. We also know that the treatment of people in the senior civil service and the civil service generally, they've got in their sights. And I think, therefore, what we have to say is we're just not going to let them get away with that stuff. We should expect the worst. We should be prepared to campaign. And I think what I wanted to say in answer to Danny's question, therefore, is that the government has an 80-seat majority. We know that the people at the heart of government have got ideas the like that we won't have seen for a long, long time. Dominic Cummings being obviously one of the main architects of that. So what is going to be needed is a strong labour movement response. Trade unions are going to have to step up to the plate, and we're going to have to be prepared to campaign on a whole range of questions on our own on some issues, but together with others, hopefully. So I wanted to leave Fran with this thought. What does that mean we should be preparing for? Well, we've talked tonight a lot about our campaign, and we've talked about looking for some legal action, the petition, but let's also talk about the most important thing of all, which is we need the union to be bigger, more people participating in it, more people being prepared to be reps and advocates, more members getting involved, not just in terms of voting when it comes to voting, but building our campaigns locally. And therefore, my message really in finishing tonight is I hope that everyone who's watched can go away and say, right, well, what else can I do now to put the union in the strongest possible position to defend ourselves moving forward on pay and a whole range of questions. And I hope that what you can think about doing is talk to anyone you know at work or online if you're not in a workplace. Are they in the union? If not, join. Can you persuade somebody else to join? Persuade them to sign our petition. Consider getting involved in our union, supporting our events. When we're asking people to answer surveys, to email MPs, make sure that you do it. If we have any meetings, which we'll have loads coming up, a lot of these will be online meetings, encourage people to come and join in. When we ask people to get involved, let's do it. If we get to the end of the summer, well on our way to 100,000 signatures, the union bigger than it is now, more people active in it, we're going to be in a stronger position. And if we do all of those things, we can win any ballot that will be needed probably later in the year. And once we've done that, the one thing we know is once we're in that position, the work we do means we are strong and the government can't ignore us. They'll be dependent on people being demoralized and thinking there's nothing they can do. So what we do in the weeks and months ahead will determine absolutely whether Dominic Cummings can get away with what he wants to do or whether we can stop them. And I hope that's a message for everyone to be heartened. Work we do shows how valuable we are. If we now get a union participating, all our members and reps, then actually we can be confident going into the autumn that we can force them to treat us fairly.
Okay, thanks so much, Mark. By way of closing, actually, Steve Gibson, who's the branch chair of DWP Bolton and Bury, says, when PCS attend the next pay negotiation, can you ask how the government can justify increasing UC claimants' standard allowances by 25% from April 2020 by £1,000 a year, but cannot find the funds to make a proper pay offer to staff who have delivered the service, including increasing workloads, as well as the risk of travelling to work through the COVID-19 crisis? so far. This measly 2% is an insult. So I'm sure we can take that into the negotiations, and will do. But I think it's really important that, you know, we've picked up as many comments as we can, and we'll run more of these so that people who didn't get their question heard tonight will have another opportunity to do just that. We've run out of time. There are loads of questions that we've answered, but there's also a number that we didn't get to. So if you've asked a question it didn't get heard, it's nothing personal. It's not that we've tried to exclude you in any way. It's that we literally don't have time for any more questions. But we will be running, as Mark said, a number of events, many of them online, and you will have the opportunity to raise these questions at further events. So I just want to reassure anybody whose question we didn't get to tonight. In closing, I want to say huge thanks as always to Richard, our signer. I know that often a number of us talk fast, and there's a lot of talk that goes on in these meetings in a short space of time, and he does a sterling job to make sure that all of that is accessible to as many members as possible. So Richard, huge thanks to you. And then finally, just to thank all of you who've joined us tonight, and keep sharing, keep sending this out to as many members as possible. As I say, in the period ahead, the campaign, as we step it up, we'll have the petition will be launched, and then obviously we'll have further events like this, and those will be your opportunity to make sure we get as many questions answered as possible. All I would urge you to do is play your part, get involved. If you're not currently involved in PCS, even if it's just talking to colleagues that sit on your team about why it's so important to sign the petition, and why that's the first step towards all of us working together to achieve better and fairer pay, and that's got to be something that's worth all of us fighting for. So thank you very much for joining tonight. Enjoy the rest of your evening, stay safe, and no doubt we'll speak to you all soon. Thanks so much then. Good night.
Thank you.